So close to the threshold of the Great Tribulation. Dark reality of the experience is taking an impact on us, isn't it? It sends goosebumps up and down our spine to realize that we are so close to the final showdown where Jehovah God breaks out with all his fury, releasing the four winds of the heavens and bringing utter catastrophe to the globe of mankind. Why does it hit us with such impact? Because we realize that when that great tribulation breaks loose, everyone is going to have a share in the suffering. Why would we be surprised at such a thing? Why would some of us even get to the point where we start to become overly concerned about it, the point of becoming spiritually sick, or becoming desperate and wondering, what can I store up, or what maneuvers can I make to get through it? Certainly, we appreciate that the only way anyone's going to survive the Great Tribulation is not through tricks of our own or subtle schemes, but by the hand of God. We certainly shouldn't be shocked that we're going to go through difficult times. Some of us, a few of us, it seems have been taken by surprise, as the future is spelled out very clearly and elucidated or explained in the pages of recent watchtowers. Some have even gone to the point of approaching brothers with questions such as, well, I thought only the anointed were going to go through that terrible suffering. Those are the heavenly callings. Well, since when can any of us picture the anointed standing out in the street starving, and none of us are the great crowd of other sheep sharing what we have with them? How could we possibly think along those lines? Well, what is that an indication of? It's an indication that some of us are losing our spiritual balance. Haven't we been preaching all of these years Jesus' words that nations will deliver you up and kill you for my name's sake? Well, we believe that, haven't we? Why should we be shocked and surprised as we begin to think about the nearness of such events? Haven't we preached Jesus' words concerning the Great Tribulation? When he says the tribulation would be so catastrophic and prodigious in its dimensions that unless God stepped in, no flesh would be saved. That includes our flesh, doesn't it? Well, now why have some of us taken this frame of mind? Why have some of us lost our spiritual bearing? Because it's natural. We're flesh. And we're not all made of the same fiber. That is, as far as our spiritual perspective. Let's look into the Bible and see what we can learn from another man who displayed great courage up to a point. And yet, how kind Jehovah God was in understanding his dilemma and plight. And it no doubt will give us great courage to face the future. The situation is historically retained for us in the book of 1 Kings. You may turn to the 19th chapter. Now, what had transpired before we get into the reading of the 19th chapter? Well, in chapter 18, Elijah was putting a taunt to the god Baal of those who worshiped him, including the queen of Israel at that time, namely Jezebel and her husband Ahab. There was a drought in the land of some 3.5 years, and yet there was no rain, despite the fact that they had their god Baal, who was presumably the god of rain. So Elijah says, well, there's a drought, just call on Baal. He's supposed to be able to bring rain, isn't he? So the account shows us that the Baal prophets, due to being taunted, started into their rigorous activity of calling and pleading and shouting and crying out to their gods on the top of Mount Carmel. They got no answer, of course, and Elijah makes it even worse, taunting them, saying, what's happened? Maybe your God's fallen asleep. Perhaps he's even stepped out to the privy. Oh, what utter humiliation. Oh, they screeched and hollered and scowled all the more, slashed their wrists, the blood flowed, but still no rain. Well, now Elijah says, Now I'll pray to Jehovah God. We'll see who the real God is. He has an altar built, repaired, which had been torn down. And on that altar, he had a sacrifice laid, and then around the perimeter of the altar, he had a trench dug. And into the trench, the remaining water in the nation of Israel was poured. Now Jehovah God was being called upon and supplicated by Elijah. And Elijah calls on Jehovah to show that if he is going to bring rain, to give an indication, well, suddenly fire flashed down from the heaven, burned up the young bull of sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, and even licked up all the water around in the ditch. And then they saw a little cloud rising up from the sea, which can be seen from Mount Carmel in the Mediterranean. And a cloud being seen meant rain, because in that area of the world there are no clouds unless rain is coming. Now the law of God said that the prophets of Baal, or any false prophet, was to be slaughtered. Well, these prophets were false, as indicated by the fact their prayer wasn't answered to the people. Elijah's God was true, because Jehovah now brought black clouds, heavy wind, and a tremendous rainstorm, and watered that parched land. Well, the law demanded the death of the false prophets. So Elijah had the prophets slain, 450 of them. Now we read the account in the 19th chapter of 1 Kings. You'll be reading perhaps from the more literal and more accurate New World Translation, and for interest's sake, I'll be reading from the Living Bible, and we'll make some comparisons. In the first verse, when Ahab told Queen Jezebel what Elijah had done, and that he had slaughtered the prophets of Baal, she sent this message to Elijah: "You killed my prophets, and now I swear by the gods that I'm going to kill you by this time tomorrow night." And she started a massive slaughter of Jehovah's prophets. What happened? Well, Elijah fled for his life. He went to the city of Beersheba, city of Judah, one of the southernmost in that region that was populated, and left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. Finally, exhausted, he sat down under a broom bush and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough. Take away my life. I've got to die sometime. It might as well be now." Then he lay down and slept beneath the broom bush. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him to get up and eat. Well, he looked around and saw some bread baking on hot stones and a jug of water. So he ate and he drank, and he lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, "Get up and eat some more, for there's a long journey ahead of you." So he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel to his original destination, 40 days and 40 nights, to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, called such because that's where Moses received the 10 Commandments from Jehovah, where he lived in a cave. Well, now Jehovah approaches Elijah, who's in the cave, and says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Well, now Jehovah knew what he was doing. He wanted to hear his reply. So Elijah says, "Well, I've worked very hard for the Lord God of the heavens, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, killed your prophets, and only I am left. And now they're trying to kill me too. Go out and stand before me on the mountain," Jehovah tells him. Well, Elijah, he stood there, and the Lord passed by. A mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose. But no, Jehovah wasn't in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. He wasn't in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, and he wasn't in the fire. Now, why does the Bible say he wasn't in those elements? Well, if Jehovah God had been in the fire or the earthquake or the wind, there would have been no mountain left, period. No, this was merely a manifestation of his power. And after the fire, the Bible says in verse 12, there was a sound of a gentle whisper, or a low, calm voice, that the World Translation says. Well, when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his scarf, and he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice again said, "Why are you here, Elijah?" He replied again, "Well, I've been working very hard for the Lord God of the armies of heaven. But the people have broken their covenant. They've torn down your altars, and they've killed every one of your prophets except me. And now they're trying to kill me too." Well, Jehovah now tells him, "Go back by the desert road to Damascus. When you arrive, anoint Hazael to be king of Syria. Anoint Elisha to replace you as my prophet, and Jehu to be king of Israel." Why? As executioners. He explains in verse 17, "Anyone who escapes Hazael shall be killed by Jehu. Any who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha." And then Jehovah God lays a verbal blow that must have cut into Elijah like a knife when he says, and incidentally, "There are 7,000 men in Israel who've never bowed to Baal or kissed him." In other words, he wasn't the only one left. There were 7,000 other prophets in Israel who were faithful, and they didn't run. You did. Oh, how that must have hurt Elijah to think that. Now, why have we read this? What do we learn from it? Well, let's think back on what occurred. Elijah was a bold prophet of God. He stood up there on that mountain and brought a prayer to Jehovah God and had full confidence he was going to bring fire down from heaven, consume the sacrifice, and bring rain. But then now, when his life was threatened, the minute the slaughter took place of the prophets, he got out. Well, why now when he was so bold? Because he was flesh. Up till now, it wasn't his flesh that was to be touched. He was preaching what God gave him. Now, you see there sometimes a parallel in us. We preach the good news with great boldness, but then when the sudden stark reality hits us, well, now our flesh is going to be affected. We may not have enough to eat. We may be cold. We may be physically assaulted. We may be killed. Now, some of us, you see, being flesh, we begin to lose perspective. That's what seemed to have happened to Elijah. And Jehovah God allows the record for us to gain courage from, no doubt. He ran. Now, when he ran as far as he could till he could run no more. Drops in that desolate, barren wasteland there way south of the Dead Sea, and prays to God that he might die. "I've had enough. I'm going to die sometime. Please let it be now." Well, what did Jehovah God do? Well, we read the account that he sent an angel and touched him. What for? To bawl him out, scold him when he woke up, or sentence him to death because he ran? Jehovah God knows flesh. He created it, and he knows it in its imperfection. Jehovah God gave no sermon to Elijah at that moment. Elijah didn't need a sermon. He needed bread and water. He was tired, depressed, physically exhausted. And our great God had the angel touch him and feed him. My, when he woke up and saw that jug of water and smelled those hot bread cakes, oh, well, restorative to the soul. And Jehovah even allowed him to go back to sleep to get his energy. And then woke him, fed him again, and let him go on to where he was going. Then when he got to the mountain, Jehovah calls him out after shaking that mountain with such a terrible blast. The rocks were torn loose, earthquake, fire, wind. He thereby demonstrates to Elijah who's got the power. Well, Elijah comes cringing out of his cave, covering his face with his scarf, and Jehovah asks, "Why are you here?" He tells them again, well, the reason I ran, so to speak, was they were killing everybody, and there were none left except me. Then Jehovah God reveals to him, no, not just you. What was Elijah's problem? His whole mind, it seemed, was centered on himself. That's why he ran. He forgot the issues. And how heartsick he must have been to find there were 7,000 back there in Israel who didn't run, and he had. But Jehovah was patient with him. God cared for his needs, ministered to him, fed him, gave him a demonstration of his power, shaking that mountain, and then sends him back and says, I'll give you protectors, executioners. We'll clear out those Baal prophets. And he sends him back to Israel, and Elijah accomplishes his next assignment. Don't we learn something there? Jehovah God knows we're flesh, and some of us maybe have been overly concerned about the Great Tribulation. No one's going to be condemnatory of us. We are what we are. Sadly enough, the pathetic fact, imperfect flesh. If some of us have been of the nature where we've been getting a little panicky and overly concerned, let's not be that way. On the other hand, don't be self-condemnatory. Put full confidence in Jehovah God that he will help you. He's done it before you before. Has there ever been an occasion where Jehovah has let you down? Now, every one of you could tell a story about what you've gone through, the truth. Now, in this country, we feel we've gone through terrible things, but we know nothing in comparison to what some of our brothers have gone through in other lands. But even at that, did Jehovah ever desert you? No. Jehovah sent an angel, and he touched you just when you needed it. That word angel comes from a Greek word angelos, which means messenger. Now think back. When you needed it the most, didn't Jehovah send a messenger to you? For example, it may have been that what you needed was something that came out in the next article of the Watchtower. Food from the table of the faithful and discreet slave gave you just the answer you needed. Well, an angel touched you. That was a messenger, wasn't it, in one form or another? Or it may have been that you sat down that night and read something in the Bible, and there it was, it hit you right between the eyes. That is the answer. That's what you needed. Or it may have been a kind word by a brother or a sister, just spoken at the right time under the right circumstances. Or it may have been a ministering to you by Jehovah's angels personally, reviving your spirit, refreshing your soul in one form or another, however they do their work of encouragement. Well, Jehovah never let you down before. He never will in the future. We may have personal problems we need help with right now. Maybe it's our flesh. Maybe it's a tour to the hospital. Maybe it's a moment where we're going to feel so alone. Maybe it's great personal difficulties that no one else knows about, but your God does. He's never let you down before, and he never will in the future. We are going to see things of such a stupendous nature in the future we can't even begin to imagine. Rather than looking with horror and anxiety of a nervous nature, conjuring up in our mind what terrible, insidious things we are about to go through in the Great Tribulation. To the contrary, Habakkuk in our year's text says they will keep their rest and exalt in Jehovah. Look forward to the Great Tribulation. This is what we've been waiting for. Didn't Jesus say, lift your heads up, your deliverance is near? This is an opportunity to prove your faith in Jehovah God. And it won't be trickery, it won't be your own ingenuity that'll get you through the Great Tribulation. It will be your total reliance on Jehovah. Seek first that kingdom, and all these other things will be added to you, so said Jesus. Look to the future with confidence. Look to it with eager anticipation, not with dread and remorse. Yes, there's no question about it. The Great Tribulation will be of such catastrophic proportions, it will be the greatest tribulation that ever hit the earth in the history of man, even greater than the flood. Jesus said. But face it, with total confidence in your God. You may have your homes burned down. You may have all of your property stripped away from you, your family ripped off into various directions. You don't know where they're at. You may be all alone, incarcerated in some little dungeon. We don't know. But if it does come, be like the 3 Hebrew children. Whatever God wills. Remember? They told Nebuchadnezzar, if we're to be thrown into the fire and burned up, that'd be God's will. If it be God's will, we be rescued, we will be. Whatever God wills, we're contented with. But we'll tell you this, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not bowing down before that idol. Have that same frame of mind. And if worse comes to worse, and we feel we're being faced even with utter execution, loss of our soul temporarily, or whether it merely be a matter of existing from one day to the next, whatever it be, have total reliance and confidence in your God Jehovah. And what will He do? Yes, He will send an angel and touch you.